Welcome to episode 38 of the Everyday Sens podcast. I'm Jack Richardson, joined by Brendan Parks from Edmonton, Alberta. I'm in Ottawa. We're still working on this time zone thing a little bit. It's been a little bit of I wouldn't say a challenge, but it's just a bit of a hurdle that we got to get through. And I'm on the early morning sometimes. You're on the early morning, the late shift. Like we've got a lot of stuff going on, but we're here with episode 38 and we have Sens hockey to talk about. The rookie tournament opens on Friday. The roster was just announced right before we started recording. So Brennan, how you doing on this Wednesday, September 13th?
Doing well, yeah. It's exciting now. We finally got some actual games to talk about, and I mean the rookie tournament. It's not looking like it did in years past, that's for sure. But at the same time, it is still Sens hockey, and I mean preseason's right around the corner too. Training camp starts next week, I believe. So we're gonna start to see some different stuff. I know Brady Tkachuk's been in Vegas at the NHL Media Player Tour, so that's been pretty cool to see on social media if you follow along and see the different things. But regardless, yeah, I'm gonna be trying to watch. I should be able to watch all three of these games and break them down a little bit. So even though there's primarily there's only 10 drafted players for the Sens there, so it's gonna be primarily like a lot of OHL guys and CHL guys and just kind of tryouts. But at the same time, like this is absolutely a tryout for some of these top Sens guys too, because Ottawa's forward group especially and their defense. I mean, we'll see, but they have spots available for guys to step up and that Pierre Dorion and the coaching staff is going to be watching this tournament too and kind of evaluating players. Like it's an evaluative tournament. That's kind of the whole point. So it's going to be exciting, and we can start with that, I guess, because there are some fairly notable players attending for Ottawa.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that. Obviously, they announced their roster today. Like Brennan mentioned, it's 10 players that they have drafted. I don't think that should come as a shock. And those 10 players are good and we're happy with them, but it's pretty barren when it comes to the prospect, cupboard now. And this can't be anyone who's not under contract, so no ELCs. So, like, if they have college drafted, like I think Stephen Halliday is probably a pretty notable omission here, but he's obviously still playing in college, so he can't be here. I'll run through some of the names that are notable. Obviously, they're going to be on it here. So forward wise, we've got Ridley Gregg, Tyler Boucher, Zach Ostapchuk, Robbie Arventi, Philippe Daoust. Sorry, I'm butchering everyone's name there. That's on forward from like what we know. And then on defense, you got Tyler Clevin, Jorian Donovan, Thomas Hamara, and I think that's it. Andonovsky feels familiar, and I feel like I should know why. Maybe they picked him up, drafted
They
him, or
just
something like
drafted him
that.
this year. Yeah.
There we go. That's exactly why. So that's four defensemen and what, five forwards that we know, and then obviously Levi Merlainen is leading the way on the back end, and I believe those are also drafted goalies, or one of them is as well, but more recent and not top prospects. So this for a lot of teams, this is like they're playing New Jersey on Friday when it starts. New Jersey's going to have some studs in there. I'm sure Luke Hughes will play. I'm sure Nemec will play. Like they've got some absolute, studs, like I said. But like you mentioned too, this is about the players that I just named. All those guys could push for a roster spot this year. It's about seeing who's at the top. Like we keep mentioning this summer, and we'll get into it a little bit too. Like the dark horse option to make the roster, the opening night roster for the Sens. We always name those same guys, especially on forward. We name those five guys, and if one of them comes out of the gate hot in the rookie tournament, then that's important too. Like we gotta factor that into to our lineup decision, because we've all been penciling in Ridley Gregg, but maybe someone else, like maybe a Tyler Boucher, outplays him here. So what are you looking to see from? Let's go through the players. Like what are you looking to see from all those guys in this rookie tournament? That the results don't really matter. It's more just about how they play.
Yeah, so I'm primarily going to be watching those top guys, like you said. I mean, the invited guys are interesting too, and I'm sure that at least one or two of them will stand out. It's a good chance for them, but for us as Sens fans, it's going to be more about the top guys. So, like Greg, obviously, we saw him in the NHL last year for 20 games, and I loved his performance. I think he's as close to a lock as you can get in my list for Ottawa's roster. I mean, he's doing extremely well at the pro level, and that's something that like we talked about before. He kept up with Claude Giroux and aligned with him, and that's just not something you see with a lot of young guys. So I think Greg's pretty close to a lock. But after that, yeah, I mean, the Sens still have fourth on opportunity available, middle six. I mean, and they might have an injury during camp. Like that's where these guys start to step up. And if somebody stands out and then somebody gets hurt during camp for Ottawa, suddenly like you look back to this camp and you're thinking, okay, like one of these guys stood out, they could easily step up and be at the top of the list for the replacement. So Boucher is a big one because he hasn't been healthy, right? He's been missing a ton of time since being drafted 10th overall in 2021. He's just somebody who I just want to see him play, honestly. Like I haven't even got to see him play a whole lot. 10th overall is no, like, obviously he was considered a massive reach there, but regardless, he was picked there and Ottawa has him. So I want to see him play. He's done a lot off the ice and kind of become a fan favorite for some people. Williams Martian, obviously, but um, we haven't really seen him play a lot. I don't think I've ever watched him play aside from a couple of games in Team America, like for the US team, the national team at the juniors. So other than that, it's just he's kind of a question mark to me. Excited to see how his physicality translates to the AHL. Also nervous that in a more physical league, like the injury opportunity is more prominent too. So hopefully he can stay healthy. But at this tournament, I just want to see him get some ice time and lay a couple of hits, nothing too crazy, but maybe some offense too. Like I haven't seen much of his offensive flair at all. So Yarventi is an interesting one for me because he's been playing in the AHL for a couple of years now. And most of these guys are coming from juniors. So Yarventi is still trying to push for Ottawa's lineup. He was an early second round pick in 2020. And I mean, he's been a sniper for Belleville, right? Like that's his go-to is just his shot and his offensive ability. But at the same time, like he's lacking a little bit away from the puck. I know I didn't watch Belleville as much as I wanted to last year, but the year before I watched a lot of their games. And Yarventi, the big knock on him is like when he doesn't have the puck, he's kind of floating, right? He floats a lot. He's not super engaged, not physical, but he's big, right? So he's the guy who I want to see how he plays away from the puck. That's what I'm going to be watching with him is how engaged he is, like if he's in the lanes or if he's just kind of floating and not engaged. You notice that at his first World Junior tournament too. And then Ostapchuk is a big one because Ostapchuk, obviously, I think he's the dark horse for a lot of people. And like you said, we'll talk about the dark horses, but he's a guy who like he's big. He's I think like 6'3", like a ton. He's just a massive guy. I know when we drafted him, he reminded me of Logan Brown, but a guy who's actually fast. Like he's a good skater. He pretty much does everything. And obviously, people who watch Team Canada, he stood out there for them at the juniors not too long ago as well. So he's a guy to watch. I think he's a certain dark horse and somebody who he might be like at the top of my list for wanting to see in the AHL just because I think he has a lot of the tools and is arguably like I think he's higher in Ottawa's prospect pool than people realize. He's a super valuable piece and a center as well. So I'll let you hit on maybe the forwards there because that was quite a few. And just before you do, I'm also going to say Philip Daou is another one. He had I think like 7 points in 9 AHL games as a rookie last year, and then he had a season-ending injury for Belleville. So Daou was a 6th-round pick in 2020, I want to say, and he is just like he is really electric. Honestly, like when I watch him, he is really skilled and fast. And somebody who stands out. He also wears number 92, or he did a couple of years ago, which is awesome because it just makes him look like he's super skilled, regardless of if he actually is. But he was lighting the AHL up last year, and he's a center as well. And then he got hurt, so he's a guy who's going to be coming back from injury, playing his first game. So keep an eye on him as well, Philip Daou.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys there, honestly. And we mentioned like yeah, it's only 10 drafted players, but again, like you said, it's a lot of AHL guys too. It's guys who are going to play in the AHL next year, and I think that's a bit rare for this tournament. I want to say that most of these guys on most of the teams are going to be players who aren't in the organization next season. A lot of drafted talent that's been signed, whatever it is. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Boucher, like you said. I think I would imagine he's going to be the guy everyone's watching because he did play last year in the rookie tournament. I think he did actually pretty well. Like he had a decent camp for the Sens last year. Obviously got sent down to junior and then got suspended and injured and all that. So it was a bit of a rocky season for Tyler Boucher, but I really do think that he's the guy I think with that. I want to say like raw skill, but I'm trying to say like he's the guy who could push for a third line spot. He could push Ridley Gregg out because you think about it, when Boucher was picked, that was kind of the book on him. He's not going to be like borderline top 6 talent is kind of what the book on him was, which is why it was seen as such a reach. But that's kind of what the Sens need right now. So I've said this before, like it could be a perfect storm for Tyler Boucher. And can you imagine, dude, if he somewhat this season just finds his footing a little bit and then, I don't know, Kubalik, Tarasenko walk out. And if two of these guys that we've just named can seamlessly transition into full-time roles, it would be massive for the Sens. The cap space they'd save, like huge, huge, huge. So that'll be an issue down the line, but it starts now and it starts with a healthy year. I believe Pierre Dorion was talking about, his plan for Boucher, let's say, and it was more on the line of if he makes us call him up halfway through the year, then so be it. So I'd imagine the plan is for him to start in Belleville, but you can't rule out like knocking the socks off in camp. Like he's been here for most of the summer, I believe. He's been skating with Giroux and stuff like that. I want to say working out with him. I know Clevin has with Tony Greco, excuse me, for a good part of the summer. Like all these guys are not high end first line talent prospects, but they're good depth pieces, all of them, and they're not all going to be able to make the lineup. So it's really a battle. This is kind of an interesting part of the rebuild, right? Where there's still some room for a few of them, but not all these guys are going to be there. Another thing about Ridley Gregg, I'm going to mention, he's mostly been playing the wing when he's been up in the NHL because he's with Giroux and with whoever else. Like they've been rotating at center. Um, but we've penciled him in on the wing as well. If this Shane Pinto thing drags out a little bit, Ridley Gregg's value becomes very, very important, right? Because he could be a third line center. Now it would change things for that third line a lot, but there is a world where, let's say, Pinto's not signed in time or he gets signed late. He can't start the season like Kachuk a couple years ago. Um, Maybe really Gregg slides to the middle. Then Tyler Boucher comes up and you go Boucher, Kubalik, Gregg. I don't know. The point is, this isn't about training camp. This is about the rookie tournament. But anyone who's a Sens fan is likely going to be watching this tournament for the prospects and for how they look and how their summer's been. It's really a good primer to training camp, which, like you mentioned, is open next week. So I'm really curious. I think it's still a great event. I think it's an awesome event. Not every team partakes, so I'm glad the Sens are. And having all these guys who I'm not going to list them all because with all due respect to them, they're not household names. They weren't drafted the NHL. This is still a huge thing. Like I know that a lot of players it's a huge deal to get drafted, but the next step after that is getting invited to rookie tournaments and rookie camps and stuff. So this is like a huge moment for a lot of these guys' careers. So it'll be fun to watch that. And hey, you never know, man. Like maybe someone just comes in and blows the doors off a little bit. Like I'm thinking, I think Arbor Jacki, he in Montreal, like again, not an outstanding player or anything like that, but he's a full-time NHL player now and made a name for himself in Montreal. And it started in rookie camps because he injured Angus Crookshank, for God's sake. But that's how he made a name for himself. So it's not nothing for these players. And obviously management, coaching, they're all going to be watching. So I'm curious. I'm going to pivot a little bit. Let's talk about Levi Merilainen, who I'm really high on. And I think a lot of people are. And Matt Sogard too. Like the future in net too is pretty good in Ottawa. So what do you want to see from Merilainen? They're obviously going to split time, so I don't think they'll all start a game on their own. But I'm really curious because last year they had Sogard there. I think Mandolese might have been still there. Like it was a bit more of a. There were a few more notable names I want to say in the crease. This year it's just Merilainen really for me. So what are you looking for the Finnish netminder in this tournament this weekend?
Yeah, so Merilainen, he's interesting because he was also considered a total reach when they picked him. Nobody even knew who he was. In fact, not even the scouts knew who he was. So now, obviously, this past year he was in the Liga, which is Finland's top men's league, and he produced a 918 save percentage through 42 games, 8 shutouts. Was one of the better goalies in that league. And again, like he's 21 years old, by the way, born in 2002, so very young for a goaltender, but playing in a men's league and doing very well. Came over, he played 2 games for Ottawa. Didn't win either of those games, but I thought he looked like good. Like he looked fine. He didn't look bad. So that's good for a 21-year-old goaltender. Usually goalies break in the league far later. Like they have a long trajectory. So it's not something you expect him to play in Ottawa right away. But to have him in Belleville even right away is pretty nice, right? Like he played 4 games for Belleville. He put up a 933 save percentage and got 1 shutout and went 3-0 with Belleville when he came over, which is like Belleville was not good either. So that's very impressive. And at this tournament, yeah, I'm looking for him to step up and be like a number one guy for this rookie camp team, I guess you could say. Like that's what I want to see. I want to see him come in. The other 2 goalies are undrafted. They're just invites, but I want to see him come in. I'm sure they're going to split time regardless and kind of like give everybody a chance, but because winning doesn't actually matter at this tournament per se. But at the same time, like I want him to come in and like prove himself as that one guy. And yeah, he's going to probably be with Mandolese and Belleville this year, like you said. So they're going to be fighting for some playing time. I know Belleville really likes Mandolese, but at the same time, Merilainen, I think, has got the higher ceiling. So I'd love to see him play. But again, that starts now. That starts with him proving himself and earning that role because, frankly, like development is important. But when you're talking goaltenders, they play such a pivotal role in the team's success. Like if Merilainen's not hot and Mandolese is, like they're going to go with the hot hand regardless of their development there. So I think this is where he can really show, like he can kind of get the step up. That's how I look at it. Because like even Ridley Gregg and guys like that, they're going to be competing with like the Crookshanks, the Sokolovs, and everybody at training camp, right? They're all going to be there competing for a role in Ottawa's lineup. They all want the same thing. This is a chance for those guys to get an edge and put like get their foot in the door with the coaching staff and the guys making the decisions here. So Maryland, it's the same thing. If you can come out and have a few really good performances, and again, you said it, Ottawa's probably going to be outmatched. So I just want to say they're playing New Jersey first, then Pittsburgh, then Montreal. So those are three like Pittsburgh will probably be the easiest one. New Jersey and Montreal have some nice prospects in their cupboard. I still have confidence against Montreal because for some reason, regardless of the event, Ottawa just owns Montreal. So
In four
regardless,
provinces,
yeah,
all of
exactly.
last year, just
Hmm.
FYI.
Yeah. So Maryland, I think he's going to be up for kind of a tough match against two of those teams at least. But at the same time, he's a good goalie. Like I think sort of what I said about Ostapchuk. Maryland's a little bit higher in that prospect pool for Ottawa than a lot of people have him ranked. Like he has a very high ceiling. And nobody really, I don't know if people see him on the same level as Sogard. I don't see him there yet, but I think that he's making his way. So far since being drafted, he has taken like ridiculously great strides, like from where he was in that junior Finnish league where nobody even saw him play before. So I'm really high on Maryland as well. And just touching on the defense, it's Clevin, Donovan, Hamara, and Andonovsky are the four drafted players. Andonovsky was a fifth round pick this past year. And then Hamara was a third. Donovan was a fifth or sixth, I believe, or fourth. And Clevin obviously was a second in 2020 or 2021. But yeah, so Clevin is the biggest name. He is going to be pushing Brandstrom for a spot and Hamonic for a spot. One of my bold predictions was actually that Brandstrom's going to play his way out of Ottawa, and then Cleven's going to kind of fill that spot. Just because I think Cleven's going to, in my mind, he's going to start in the AHL. That's what I think they're going to do. But I think if he's playing well in the AHL, they're obviously very high on him. He came back early this year too. He's been training on the ice for quite some time now. He seems to really have that drive. So that's going to stand out to the coaching staff. And Pierre Dorion obviously loves Cleven too. He was on that no touch list when they were trading for players. So I think you can expect to see Clevin dominating the AHL, and then obviously his size. If Ottawa does push for a playoff spot, he's the type of player in the prototype who they would want to put in that lineup. Because don't get me wrong, he's young, but he's massive, he's physical, he's gritty. Like he'll go to the corners, he'll defend the net front, everything you want to see from a defenseman in the playoffs, and exactly where people are concerned about Erik Brandstrom in the playoffs when Ottawa ultimately makes it. I think Clevin is kind of like on the opposite side of the spectrum. So obviously, I love Brandstrom, but I do think they're kind of going to project Clevin there in the long term on that bottom pairing. He's just a very ideal fit. Like his prototypical like profile is just so ideal for that. So I think that he's going to be a player to watch at this tournament for sure. He should be their number one defenseman, kind of driving play, and that's something you said you liked it in the NHL last year. That was kind of unexpected. Was that he was moving the puck so well. That was unexpected for me too. I thought he would struggle, but he was making good decisions and being safe with it. So that's something that's going to be to watch at this tournament too. And then Donovan Hamara and Andonovsky are all kind of depth defenseman prospects, but at the same time, I've liked what I've seen from Hamara. He played at the World Junior for Czechia, and he moved the puck really well as well. He's a good skater. Donovan's the same way. And then Andonovsky, I haven't even seen him play yet, so I'm just excited to see him play. He's a physical guy too. This could be a pretty gritty tournament, honestly. They've got some bruisers in the lineup, like Boucher, Clevin, and Andonovsky are all bruisers. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think we could get some scrappy play here. And I know at the other rookie tournaments too, there's been some scrappy play. Like when Crookshank got hurt, that game took off a little bit. And even though it's a rookie tournament, it's an exhibition game, the result doesn't matter. Like the players are into it and they're competing, right? Like they're going hard. I know nobody wants to see anybody get hurt, but like they will throw hits. They will be physical. It's not like a Timbits hockey game. This is actual, like we're competing for a job, right? So I'm excited to watch it. And I think that the Sens do have some quality players to keep an eye on, despite kind of lacking some of the talent that we saw in previous years.
That's the thing about these tournaments is like it's high pace because yeah, like you said, people are trying to get noticed, and when you're in a tryout scenario, that's what this is, right? You want to get invited to camp as a rookie because that's what half of these guys are looking for is like just an invite to camp, a little contract. They get good money even just being invited to training camp. So doing that is important. And like guys like Clevin is kind of the guy of all the players who have played a game so far. Um, and no offense to Ridley Gregg because he's made a big impact. He played a lot more games for sure than Clevin, but of all those guys, Clevin was the most surprising to me in a good way. Like you mentioned, I was blown away by his puck movement, his poise, and when you match that with the size and the physicality, like that's pretty perfect modern day defenseman. So I'm curious to see how he does against, and again, it's not lesser, but lesser competition because I was actually at that game against Tampa at the end of the year last year, and he was a force. He was so good. So I think he played 4 or 5 games or something like that at the end of the year, maybe even closer to 10. But he was really impressive. So I wonder if he can really. I want to see how he elevated his game. I want to say, I want to see of all the players, he's the one I'm going to watch the most because, like you mentioned, he's going to be pushing for a spot. And in terms of contract structure, like one way, two way, he's probably not going to make the team based on the D they have now. But one injury happens, I think Tyler Cleven's right up there. So I'm really excited to see him. But yeah, I like that you mentioned that it's high pace stuff because I'm like we're gonna be watching obviously, but like they're not like I'm not invested. Like I don't need them to win. It's fun seeing them do well, but it's more of just a primer to training camp, which I'm excited about. Obviously, that's right around the corner. The Sens content's coming. The news bits are dropping. So with that, we'll transition. Let's talk about Rob Murphy being promoted to professional scout. Jim Clark, I don't want to say demoted, but I guess in the real sense he was. He's a bit older. He's about 7 years old, I think. So probably just kind of phasing out a little bit. But Jim Clark was the chief professional scout, I should say, for almost 10 years, 9 years, 9 seasons for a long time. And honestly, I think it's good because that's pretty recent memory for most Sens fans. I think that's fair to say. So we have a good recollection of the pro scouting in general. You and I have both talked about how it needed to be revamped, add new people. This is kind of just a shuffle, it seems like. But I think with the hiring of Sean Tierney, which was officially confirmed as well by the team this week, it'll be part of it. Like I think the analytic, like Sean Tierney, you can look at as a pro scout as well. So, what was your thing? Like also Ben Sexton being promoted to an assistant coach for DJ Smith out of Belleville. So, what are your thoughts on just the three moves, like bang, 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 earlier this week that the Sens made?
Yeah, so I think like the most prominent thing in my mind is that Michael Andlauer is continuing to make these moves very quickly, and again, he's not even officially the owner yet, but everything's going through him. So I think so far I'm very kind of just pleased with what he's done. I think Rob Murphy, we talked about how um, the Sens needed to change their pro scouting department, and I think they need to expand more than anything. But Rob Murphy comes in, so he spent 3 years in Buffalo as their pro scouting member of their staff, and obviously, I mean, Buffalo, they've I don't know, they've made some good moves. They've targeted some good players. And I think that the biggest thing here is that they're going to be all integrated. So even though Rob Murphy is the chief pro scout, like he's going to be working with Sean Tierney, right? To then make evaluations on players. It all comes down to evaluations too. Like Sean Tierney is the head of the analytics department. So I would expect them to hire more members, which he's probably going to have the biggest say in who they hire, who they target. But then all these groups are going to work together to make evaluations and target the right type of player. That's what the Sens have been lacking is they haven't been like they haven't had enough voices in the room. They haven't had people kind of sharing different opinions and looking at different sides of things. Like they've had a few pro scouts, like one of the smaller pro scouting departments in the league, but then they don't have anybody in the analytics department who comes in and says, well, have you guys thought about this? Like, have you guys seen this stat and these metrics and what, the type of player this actually is? Like when you look at a little deeper into them, than just on the surface. So having these different types of groups, it's going to be able to provide different opinions. And I think that the biggest thing is Andlauer kind of making these moves already. And it just shows like I'm expecting still, we've got another just 2 days less than a month until the season starts, the opener. I think that we're going to see even more moves. Like I think it's going to be just progressively filling out the groups and expanding. We've already seen like there's a whole new department, right? That's huge, but then there's going to be new members. So I think Andlauer so far, I'm giving him like an A+ on what he's done. The biggest thing though that's going to be coming up is Daniel Alfredsson. I think he'll be in, and that's going to be kind of a known thing. It's been talked about a lot. We're going to hear about that. I would expect in the next month or so. But yeah, these three moves for me, Ben Sexton as well. I think he actually played some games for Ottawa, and then he was a coach down in Belleville, and the players from what I saw spoke very highly of him. He's well respected in the organization. To then have him come up, and obviously like the relationship between Belleville and Ottawa is almost a little bit like underappreciated because a lot of these guys in Ottawa, they came through the ranks. Like you look at Batherson, Norris, and you go through the list, and these guys played in Belleville. They dominated in Belleville and they learned under that whole coaching staff. And Sexton was there for a lot of those years, right? So he's a guy who they respect, they know, they can trust on the bench. And yeah, I'm excited to see this, and I'm excited to see kind of where this coaching staff goes this year because that's going to be Andlauer's potentially his biggest decision is whether he wants to replace the coaching staff, depending on how the year goes, and who's going to stay, who's going to go. So I'm very happy with these moves. I think that the Sens, you're going to see them start to target different types of players than they have in the past. It's not just about character anymore, right? It's about on ice performance and who's going to fit with the style this team is playing, because they have their core members, but they have to find complementary pieces who can kind of fill the voids on different lines and different spots in the lineup. So I'm pleased with these moves for sure.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned a lot about having an extra voice at the table. It's not necessarily that they need to adapt to this analytics, driven um, NHL now, right? Because I think what Vegas and what Colorado, the past two Cup champs, have shown is you need a healthy balance. You need, I think the Avalanche, excuse me, 2 years ago got Jack Johnson, who was just the anti-analytic player, and like the Vegas had a couple of guys who weren't probably the best analytically, but they end up winning a couple. You have to have a good balance, and having an extra voice at the table is important, and that's what's important about the professional scouting and stuff like that. And I like what you mentioned about Sexton as well. I'm going to go to Sean Tierney here quickly. I'll go off what Bruce Garriock wrote in his article the other day, because I think it kind of adds a little bit of context that we kind of assumed, but weren't, didn't think it was the be all and end all. But Bruce says incoming owner Michael Andlauer, who's expected to close the deal to purchase the club any day now, has opted to expand the club's use of analytics by hiring Sean Tierney as the director of a newly created department. That's what's interesting to me. And obviously, look, I'm not trying to read into every single word that Bruce says, but language is important. And I don't think the Sens specified that in their release. I know that it wasn't Dorion who hired him, and there was really no mention from Pierre. And personally, to me, it reminds me a lot of Pierre Maguire coming into the fold for the Sens. And we know for a fact that even if it was his assistant GM, I think that's what Pierre Maguire's role was. Was it assistant GM, or was it like special advisor or something like that?
I think it was like special something or other. Yeah.
Okay. Well, whatever it was a position that the GM usually hires for. And whenever someone is brought in for that role by the owner, it's usually in case they have to fire their GM and change things up. So, not saying that Sean Tierney is going to be that guy, because I don't think he will be, but rumor mill this week was Elliot Friedman was talking about the Sens, obviously, and talking about Andlauer, and him and Jeff Merrick on the 32 Thoughts podcast alluded to the fact that they're probably going to bring in more people. He said it would likely be more addition and less subtraction at this point. So he's basically saying Dorion's going to stay, but a Steve Stais, a whoever else, like it's going to be more of this, right? More addition than subtraction, which is good. It's what they need. And I really like the extra voice at the table. Like it really does tie in. I keep saying it, but it ties in so much to the professional scouting. Like it's more about, like, think about this year at the trade deadline, right? Or even I'll start in the summer. So the Sens are in a cap bind right now. They have two RFAs unsigned, one of which specifically is at a key piece to their roster. The other one in Sokolov, who I guess technically could sign for this cap space, but they're waiting for God knows what reason. That is not a problem with the contracts they have on the roster right now. Like no one's overpaid, I don't think, or no one's a bad contract. Let's say I can see an argument for Joseph, but it's been 1 year. I'd like to see another season of him under that deal to make that statement. Like I think everyone is paid adequately when they play up to par. The problem is the dead money that they have. And I'm talking about the dead money right now in conversation with the pro scouting, because if you have a good pro scouting department, Michael Del Zotto doesn't happen. That Matt Murray contract probably has a little bit more backlash. Bobby Ryan, I mean, like the buyout of Bobby Ryan didn't have to happen either. What else am I missing? Colin White contract. I'm not sure if that, like, it's just all those little things that, yeah, in hindsight, it's easier to say the bad move, whatever. He's just covering up his tracks, blah, blah, blah. Like the Nikita Zaitsev trade, I think you mentioned it. That alone, the Connor Brown, Zaitsev, and CC, that would not have happened with the pro scouts. They would have said, you know what? If you want to tank for a bit, yeah, but this guy has 7 years on his deal. You want to finish strong on those back half of the contract, you're going to have to move that eventually. Like, he's not that good. So that's what ideally, that's what a pro scouting department does. So now I'll go to the trade deadline when hopefully the Sens are fighting for a playoff spot or in a playoff spot at that point comfortably and looking to add. They're not going to add a Patrick Brown at the trade deadline. They're going to go and add someone who can serve as a third line player, but you have too much depth that you might need to scratch a guy like Ridley Gregg in the playoffs, and that's not a bad thing. So that's what I think a good pro scouting department does. And it's, again, not a knock on the current one that was there or like the most recent ones or whatever, because it's been hard. And obviously this is not a very it hasn't been anyway a very what's the word, like, not, it's been a unique scenario under Eugene Melnyk. I think that's a nice way to put it, let's say. But now things are changing, and I think things changed as soon as Ryan Bonus got here. I think things will change going forward, and it's just tough because it's not even like against Pierre Dorion, because I think they've actually targeted really good players for the roster recently. Like, in Tarasenko should be a great fit. I think Kubalik's good. Like, all this stuff. But it's having more people. I don't want 2 more years of, oh, Pierre Dorion's going to watch this guy at the trade deadline, and that's a big deal because if he's going on his own, it means he's scouting and stuff like that. Like, that shouldn't be happening. So you need to have a good department to do that. And I think both of these moves, the promotion of Rob Murphy and the analytics department getting going, that signals that that'll start. So I'm really excited. I think what's most exciting is that Andlauer is the one doing it. And that should wrap up soon. Tierney, excuse me, starts on Friday, so the 15th. So we'll see when that wraps up. But you want to talk a bit more about Sexton? I know you mentioned he was in the AHL with Norris, Batherson, and all that. So what do you think? What impact could that have? Because personally, again, just quickly, I think that signals to me it's more, and I know it's a sad topic, but it could just be for a Bob Jones kind of thing, just to, like, I don't think they're gonna have 5 assistants on the roster, like with his ALS, with the battle against ALS. Like, I believe it's probably kind of like a phasing out thing, let's say, or just to supplement that. So that's how I see it. But again, it's not a bad thing because Sexton is familiar with a lot of the roster.
Yeah, he is, and I think, like, just bringing Sexton in, it's comfort, right? Like, I think these guys, it's gonna instill confidence, and the biggest thing about Ottawa that I've noticed and that everyone's noticed is that they're very tight-knit. They've built and they've constructed a very close roster, the players, but not even just the players, the coaches. Like, I don't think there's a lot of teams around the league you can look at and kinda see this relationship between the players and the coaches that you can in Ottawa, and it's funny because a lot of the fan base doesn't really like DJ Smith as a coach and what he does on the ice. Like, I've found myself frustrated with his decisions a lot of the time, but still, it's almost impossible to hate on the guy because, like I can never see the Sens fan base chanting DJ out. I mean, maybe I could if things went really badly, but like it's hard to hate on the guy because you can see how much the players respect him and you can see how much they really appreciate him. And it's not just like it's not even just a respect thing. It's really an appreciation thing. And the fact that he's so supportive and he's allowed them to thrive and feel comfortable coming to the rink. And now we're seeing this stuff about Mike Babcock in Columbus too. Now, again, there's two sides to that. I don't really want to get into it because there's like a ton of rumors flying around. Regardless, it's just kind of the idea of it and kind of like just toxic coaches in general. I'm not saying that's even what's happening with Babcock necessarily, but in general, there's a lot of stories. Like, look it up. You just look up toxic NHL coaches stories, and like you'll find a ton of things where the players felt uncomfortable going to the rink. They didn't have fun. They didn't want to go and even practice because they felt like it was just a bad environment to be in. And Ottawa's constructed this group where, I mean, like go back 5 years in Ottawa, but now Ottawa's constructed this group where it's clear that the players feel comfortable. They feel like they're excited to go to the rink every day. And I think bringing up a guy like Sexton too, it just adds to that, right? It's another addition where you know that the players like him. You know that this is not even really a trial. It's like you know it's going to be a good fit. He's very well respected, right? He's been around the Sens organization since he was a player. Like it's a guy who has a lot of knowledge about the team, the franchise, the history, but then also the players who are currently on the roster, and that's something awesome. He also has a lot of the like prospect development experience, obviously coming from the AHL, working with those young guys. So that's another thing where they bring up Ridley Gregg. He coached him previously, right? They bring up guys like even Boucher in the future. He's going to be a guy who can help out and kind of relate. He's a recent player too, so that's nice as well. In general, though, what I will say about these hirings, and I'm trying to remember who said it, but it was like they're spending more money on the staff right now. Yes. And this is something that Eugene could never do. You're spending more money on the staff, but think about how much money you're going to save on players by not making bad evaluations. Like, think about the players that Ottawa signed and traded for, and Nikita Zaitsev being the best example, who were terrible bets. And most people could tell you when they came in that they were not good bets, that they should not have signed them. They should not have dished out millions and millions of dollars to them, right? If you would have just spent not even $1 million on staff and expanding your staff, like you would have avoided losing millions and millions on bad players. And it's just, this is stuff that is completely avoidable. And I think it was Micah, Micah on Twitter who does like analytics and stuff said like a team could hire me and I could just tell them like no a million times a year and it would be totally worth it because like they could ask me if they should trade for this player and I could just straight up tell them no and that would be worth paying me a salary because like it's just it would save them millions of dollars, right? And so I think it's sort of like that spending in the short term to save in the long term type of deal with really just by expanding the staff in general, pro scouting, analytics, everything. That's where winning franchises go right, in my opinion, and where Ottawa went wrong for so many years is that they tried to spend the bare minimum on the staff and save like every penny here and there, but then you're losing so much money because you're not getting the right evaluations, you're not getting the right opinions, right? So I think that Anlauer has already kind of built this group for success. Like I said, I'm expecting him to continue bringing people in. I don't think he's shy about spending money. There was that story about him when he was owner of the AHL team. Was it Hamilton? And I'm just going back now, and he spent money like hundreds of thousands of dollars out of his own pocket to bring players in because it wasn't like you're allowed to do that in the AHL. This was years ago, but he spent all that money out of his own pocket because he wanted to build a winning roster. Like I don't think he's shy about spending money to build a winning roster, and that's the best thing about him is that he wants to win. And yes, it's sort of naive to think that in a way, but at the same time, like he wants to make money, but he's smart enough to know that to make money, you have to spend money, right? That's how it is. So I think that this Sens group is built for success. That's really the biggest thing. And like I said, they're going to be saving money in the long term by spending more on staff now. And I continue to expect them to continue to hiring people. And yeah, like that's really all I've got on it. But I'm excited to see kind of the players that they target now compared to the past. And I think I'll probably make a post on that at some point at the end of this year. I just think we're going to see kind of a pattern change of who they're targeting and what they're targeting because they're bringing people like Sean Tierney in. Like he knows what he's talking about, and he's going to hire his own staff too.
Yeah, 100%. And it goes back to, like I said, with Del Zotto and with everyone else, like those don't happen. And yeah, every team has dead money in some capacity, but usually, like I'm thinking of the Minnesota Wild, like those are really crippling buyouts, but they had to do it in the long term success. I think this is the last year, second year, maybe of those buyouts hurting them. But they're for players that played for your team and were like jersey sellers and all that. So they made you your money technically, right? With playoff runs and all of that. Like it probably balances out. Del Zotto and Murray, and I mean Bobby Ryan's not really fair, but Del Zotto, Murray, those two didn't do anything here. They did nothing but pain. And no offense to either guy. Like also Del Zotto retired. They're paying a retired player now because they had to buy him out on a 2-year deal. And like that makes no sense. So it was a bad contract from the start, and all of that stuff will stop, hopefully, or be more analyzed. And even if it doesn't stop and questionable moves still happen, at least we know there's a group doing it. And if there's four seats at the table and three agree and one doesn't, that one who doesn't is important. But then you go to 6 people, 8 people, and if 2 or 3 people disagree, you might start listening to 2 or 3 more people than listening to one person spewing the hate all the time. Like that's just the way it will work in a meeting. So I think it's nothing but good. Again, nothing against anyone in general, because realistically, the Sens did okay for the last decade until they tore it all down. Like from 2014 when Jim Clark took over until 2017, like the pro scouting wasn't awful. It wasn't their strength. It was their drafting, and it still is to this day. So I'm excited. So quickly before we wrap up, we're recording on Wednesday, September 13th. Ideally, it's going to come out today at some point. We had some technical difficulties. I don't know if anyone can spot it. I'm sure you can with the lighting in our rooms and stuff, but we had to wait a couple hours. A little power outage. We had some background noise going on, but we're recording anyway. We're here. But I mentioned the date a couple times, and I'm doing it again because 5 years ago today, Brennan, the biggest trade in franchise history happened, or arguably the biggest trade. It could turn out to be easily, but Erik Karlsson was traded 5 years ago today. So let's go back to 5 years ago, Brennan. What were you up to, and how are you feeling on that day? I tweeted it out and got a lot of good reactions. I gotta say though, a lot of people saying like, "Oh, I'm happy with it now," and like that wasn't the question. It was how did you feel on September 13th, 2018, when a superstar player just got traded away from your team when they were in the middle of a teardown? What were you feeling on that day?
Yeah, I can actually remember vividly when I found out. So I was in high school 5 years ago today, and I was in gym class playing baseball. And I don't know how I remember that, but I remember the exact thing because I looked at my phone and I saw the trade, and I'm like, oh, geez. Like, I was not happy. Like it was, like I'm not gonna lie, it was. Most people thought it was a bad trade. I mean, we've kind of talked about it before, how like Josh Norris was a prime part of the deal, and at the time he kind of projected as like a third line center, and Trent Mann or even thought that he was going to be a third line center. So it's like you look back now and they got a guy like Tierney who ironically he actually came in like people thought he was better than he actually turned out to be in Ottawa.
He had
And they
50
got like
points in that first season. He had a good year.
yeah, I mean, and he did well in San Jose, and then for some reason, I guess like he had back injuries too. He kind of tailed off, but at the time, I mean, it just seemed like Ottawa got some filler pieces in Tierney and DeMello, and then they got a decent prospect in Norris. They got a like C-level prospect in Balsers. Obviously, the way that they spun it out because they got that first round pick, which also at the time was expected to be 20 to 25th probably. So that ended up being Tim Stutzler, right? So it's just like how they worked it out. Obviously, went very well. We looked at the trade tree. Like Stutzler obviously came from that Norris, but then they also got Ostapchuk, Sogard. They all came from that trade tree. So that's like a huge thing, clearly. But at the same time, Maryland too, by the way, for DeMello. Um, but at the time, I was certainly angry. I mean, I felt underwhelmed. It felt like they definitely went for quantity over quality, which I think they did. Like, there's no, yeah, it turned out that they got more quality, but I think at the time, Pierre Dorion probably said to himself, like, we're going to take the quantity here and we're going to try and stock the cupboard a little bit, but we're not getting a blue chip prospect for a guy who, as we've just seen, won the Norris Trophy and scored 100 points 5 years later. So obviously they gave up that level of player and they went for quantity. So I was upset about that because they should have gone like, I don't know about you, but I would much rather take a blue chip prospect and like one or two other pieces than take like five or six mediocre pieces. That's certainly my preference is to get the quality over the quantity, but it seemed like maybe they didn't have that offer on the table and they had to kind of go with what they could get. And as it turned out to be a good deal. I'm really interested to see though in an alternate universe what would have happened to Pierre Dorion if the trade did not work out as it did, and what would have happened to the Sens. Like if that pick that got Timmy was 20 to 25th overall, and that's probably like say they got like a third line player for that, and they got like if they didn't get that, Norris didn't pan out the way he did, this team, where would they even be? Like, would Pierre Dorion even have a job? I don't think he would. I think Dorion
Right.
would have been gone because like the way that trade worked out, people would still bring it up, and that would just haunt Dorion's career, wouldn't it?
Yeah, he wouldn't be the GM anymore, and I don't know the timeline, but it wouldn't have lasted much longer past 2021 maybe. And Connor Bedard would probably be an Ottawa Senator. I think that's how it would like. So obviously not a brutal reality if you put it that way, but um, I mean, okay, here's another lens. I think if Norris and Stutzel don't work out, they don't trade for DeBrincat. Giroux doesn't come here. They don't trade for Chikrin. Like a lot of things don't happen. But yeah, it's a fun hypothetical. Uh, I remember exactly where I was. I was also in high school. So it was obviously school had just started, and we were like driving home or something like that. And I remember being in like a math class or something like that, and it started breaking. And then I remember getting in the car on the way home with all my friends, and like getting the news. And one of my friends is a Leafs fan, other one's a Sens fan, and we were just like, we were devastated. It was, but you got to think in the context too. Like going back is actually kind of fun. Like a couple months before that, they drafted Brady Kachuk with that pick, and again, it looks like it totally worked out. Like it's actually, we should do a little. I don't know what the word is, but that 3-4 month span in 2018 from June to September, whatever that is, 4 or 5 months, like completely altered this franchise. And in those moments, we thought everything was crumbling around us, and rightfully so. Like Brady Kachuk wasn't the consensus pick. That Karlsson trade was not good on face value. Like a lot of things happened in that timeline that actually are now finally we're reaping the benefits of it. Like Tim Stützle and Brady Kachuk are NHL superstars. It's crazy to think about it in that context. But yeah, no, at the time, I just remember being quite upset. I'll also vividly remember, like, obviously training camp had just started, I think, and um, Dorion, like the Sens went to, I want to say Newfoundland or something like that. I don't know where they were playing, but I'll never forget it was against the Leafs, and it was Tavares's like first time in a Leafs jersey. It was a big deal because he signed that summer. And I was watching with my dad, and he wasn't as invested, still isn't as invested in all the details and stuff, but he knows the names and knows that Erik Karlsson's he was his favorite player. And we were watching the preseason game against the Leafs against Tavares, and he sees Dylan DeMello, who came back in that deal. And I remember him going like, "This is the guy they got to replace Karlsson. This is ridiculous." Like I think something along those lines. And I was like, I mean, technically, yeah, but no, you know what I mean? Like the DeMello's a great defenseman, but it was, I mean, if that's another thing you don't even think about, the surface level fan, right? Like if you, it's not easy moving your star players because then you've got to be able to sell jerseys of the guy of the people you bring back in. So yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know. It's fun to look back on. 5 years is a good like timeline. I'd say to Like if Dorion made that trade and then got up to the podium and instead of saying it was his proudest day of GM, he said, "Let's look back on this in 5 years." I think even then we would have called for his head. But I mean, I digress. I mean, it was a whirlwind of a time as a Sens fan, and it's all been leading to this. And I feel like I might have thought the same thing last year, but they've got the experience of last year now. So now we're going into this year. Expectations are different. All you need to do is just look at Brady Tkachuk's media that he's been doing, and it really just gets me excited. So I can't wait for the season to get going. We are going to wrap up right there, though, for episode 38. We will be back at some point this weekend, probably maybe Friday, but we've got the rookie tournament. So I'm not sure about the times on those games, but
So we've got Friday at 12, so 10 my time. So we could like break that down at some point if you want to. But yeah, do a little game review, a little practice for the season. I think that's a good time.
yeah, I'd be down for that. Yeah, and then the same times on the weekend.
Yeah, so 12 Saturday and then 1:30 Eastern on Monday as well is the last one.
Perfect. Okay. Oh, they're
Yeah.
taking Sunday off for the
Yeah.
NFL, I guess. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So we'll be covering that. We'll figure things out, obviously, for episode 39. But for now, that's been episode 38. Bit of a rocky one. Apologize for some audio issues earlier. There was vacuuming going on, which is out of my control. Or I should put a statement out like the Columbus Blue Jackets, due to circumstances beyond my control. A vacuum was going on during the first half of the podcast, but that's going to do it. We will see everyone for our next episode. Remember to like and subscribe to the YouTube page and subscribe to everydaysens.com. He mentioned the season's ramping up. I'm going to be writing articles there. Brennan writes articles all the time. We're going to get highlight analysis, the works. So subscribe to everydaysens.com and you can find all that there. So thank you everyone for joining and we will see you next time.